Good afternoon. Welcome to the final session of the first day of Rezzed. Hope you all had a good show so far. This is, I think, going to be one of the more interesting talks we have over the weekend. I'm quite excited about it. We have Michael Cook here, who's going to show you his AI game programmer, Angelina. We'll have time after the session for a quick Q&A, but without further ado, I'll hand over to Michael Cook.
Hello. Everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Up on the screen, wonderful. Right, yeah, thanks very much. And thank you all in particular for being here. My name's Mike, he wasn't lying, and I'm here with Angelina. Angelina won't be speaking today, it'll just be me. But we're both from Goldsmiths at the University of London. But I want to thank you for being here today, like such a massive crowd. And it's lovely because I'm not here to present like a big blockbuster game that you're all going to be queuing up for in front of the non-existent retail stores at the end of the year, or waiting for that moment where the pre-order clicks and you can suddenly download this terrible Flash game about Peter Mandelson or something. And you're not here because me and Angelina have huge indie credentials and we have this amazing awards for design and excellence. To be honest, the only thing that we can lay claim to is that Angelina came 500th in a game development competition once upon a time. No, I think you're here, hopefully, for the same reason that I'm here, the same reason that I do this work. And that's because you're interested in the future, not what you're going to be playing 6 months from now, or 18 months from now, or even a couple of years from now, but what's going to be happening 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And part of that future looks like this. It looks like big skyscrapers and jetpacks and hover cars. But also, I want to tell you today that part of the future looks like this. It looks like crazy, weird, rubbishy platformers with British politicians in them that make no sense whatsoever. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So feel free to quietly shuffle out the back in case this wasn't what you were expecting. Right, so in case all of that was a bit unexpected to you, I've been working on a piece of software called Angelina for the last few years now as part of my PhD research. And we've moved from making very basic 2D arcade games. Then we started making kooky 2D platformers based around newspaper articles. Then we took a detour. We made some puzzle games. Angelina started inventing game mechanics. And then maybe, if you've heard about Angelina in the last few months, probably this is what you've heard about it for. Because recently we started building 3D games. And for the first time, Angelina was able to enter game jams, game design competitions, much like the one that's going to take place at Rezzed this weekend. And what I want to talk to you about today are the questions that have come up during this project, the questions that motivated it, the questions that I've tried to answer so far, and the questions that I actually have no answers to yet, and maybe you have answers to them, or maybe together we'll find out what the answers are over the coming decades. Before I get onto the games, just a few slides. This is where the work that led to my PhD started from. There's a bunch of researchers out there who want to answer this question: can computers be creative? Just like you and I are creative, just like the amazing developers that you've been talking to today, but just like they were being creative when they were making their video games. And that means stuff like this. This is a painting called The Dancing Salesman Problem. And it was produced by a piece of software called The Painting Fool, which has been developed by my supervisor, Professor Simon Colton, for the last 10 years. And the software can do all kinds of stuff. It can paint from imagination. It can paint portraits of you. It can ask you to put on a particular emotion and do a portrait of you and tell you about it afterwards. It's just started doing poetry recently. And a lot of the people that are working in this field, they're building joke generators, narrative generators, painters, comedians even. But what's been interesting for me, what this PhD's been about, is whether computers can make video games. And so this was the question that started off the PhD a few years ago when I was sat in my supervisor's office. And this is one of the very first games Angelina ever produced. No one's ever seen it before. It's called Gala 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 Gala, because Angelina generated names based on the names of other games. So I don't know if you know Galaga, but it was a very famous game at its time. And I want to show you this just because it's terrible. This is going to be the worst game that ever gets shown at a Rezzed developer session, for sure. In the top left-hand corner, because I never thought I'd ever have to demo this to anyone, there's a grey blob that you can't really see moving left and right. This is me. And if I touch these red things, I lose score. So you can see the scores going down. Let me see if I can get through this gap. Nope. Oh, there we go. So the only thing that you can do in the game is lose score. There's not really any objectives. Everything's overlapping. And then part of the reason was that I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I had to learn how to make games before Angelina could learn how to make games. But this is where we started. And Angelina started building very simple games like this. And it would do things like design the rule sets. It would design level layouts. It would place blocks where it thought that there should be blocks. It would play the games, try them again. And so, yeah, okay, we answered that question on a technicality, but these games aren't very interesting because the games that you've seen out there today, not many of them are just weird abstract games. They're about things. They're about the real world. So can computers make games about stuff, about real things? So this is when we started to move on to like the first phase of Angelina that was got a little bit of attention. And this version was able to take a newspaper article from the Guardian website, and it would try and build a game about it. So this one's called The Goose That Laid the Golden Clegg. And again, like, I've not really shown this one before. This is not one that got a lot of showing. Just let me fiddle with the resolution a little bit. So this was made at a time when the relationship between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats was a bit tense. So hopefully, if we've got sound, you're going to hear a little bit of music. You're going to hear maybe some sound effects. You're going to see photos popping up. And all of these things were selected for one reason or another by Angelina. Now, many of them don't make any sense. So there's very happy music playing, and there's boyish photos of Nick Clegg on the screen. And as we move around, you'll see that there are photos that maybe don't make quite so much sense. I'm just going to go and collect a power-up from over here, because I need to jump a little bit higher. So Angelina's still doing, like, mechanical design problems here. It's still designing. I think this is a photo of, like, a Liberal Democrat Party conference or something. I'm not really sure. Angelina's still doing design problems, like the layouts of the levels and what these power-ups should do. It's deciding whether they should make me jump higher or lower. But it's also trying to make the game about something. So look at this one. I like this one. A really seedy picture of George Osborne in the corner of the game. And then there's, like, a political cartoon here with Gordon Brown, I think. So even though it's still doing all this basic game design stuff, it's trying to make the game about something. And even though you probably don't know what the news story was about, and I can't exactly tell you just from playing this game, you get a flavor that it was about something. It was about the relationship between Nick Clegg and these other political leaders. And so it's getting closer. We began to answer that question of, yeah, you can make games about things, even if it's in a really dumb way. But the problem was, it was dumb. And the great games that you'll have seen today, they don't just paint stuff from Google on the front of games. They use the meaning of the real world to express something through their games, through the rules, through the systems. And this is something that's become more and more important to me as the Angelina project's gone on. So I want to show you something that I don't think I've ever demoed particularly publicly. It was on my website, but no one really saw much about it. It was a game I made for the 7-day roguelike contest last year, and it's called A Rogue Dream. And the way it works is, the game starts by asking you to give it a noun. So it says, last night I dreamt I was and you give it a word. So in this case, I gave it cop. And it goes on to Google, and it uses some techniques to mine information from what people think about cops. So it gets a picture of a cop car for you, and then it says, okay, well, what are the enemies of policemen? So I don't know if you recognize that, but that's the lawyer from The Simpsons, right? Because cops hate lawyers, so those are your enemies in the game. One of the abilities that it's generated for you is shoot to kill. This is something that the internet thinks about policemen. This is not necessarily a fact. This is just a feature of the way the game extracts information. If you look up journalist, one of the abilities they have is plagiarize. One of the items they carry around is coffee. One of the other abilities that came up last year for journalists was hate Syria. That was one of the actions you could do. And that's because at the time, Syria was in turmoil, but it was also in the news headlines a lot, and people wondered why journalists weren't covering it so much, and the game kind of expressed people's hatred. And there are also much more controversial things that the game came up with that I won't directly mention here, but perhaps you can talk to me about it later. And if you want to try this out, ask me a question about it at the end, and I'll demo this one. But I won't here because it's a little bit slow for the main talk. So, I should not touch my microphone. I'm really sorry at the back. So we've got games making things, we've got them making about stuff, we've got them making meaningful games. But the thing that I really hated about the newspaper generation was that you had to give it a newspaper article. And when you watch the game jam happening over the next couple of days, if you ever see coverage of Ludum Dare or the Global Game Jam, or if you just ask game developers what they make games about, they don't have really specific ideas like, I'm going to make an article about the top headline from The Guardian tomorrow. And it was kind of a cop-out, because Angelina was trying to make a game about something that had just happened. So there were images all over Google, people were talking about it on Twitter. It was a really easy task in many ways. If you'd asked Angelina to make a game about 17th century London, or you, that's a much harder task. And it's also a much more creative task, it's a much more human task. So how can we generalize games, and generalize game designers like Angelina, and make them able to make games about anything? And so we come on to the bit that you might have seen before. This is a game called To That Sect. And Angelina designed this as an entry into the Ludum Dare Game Jam in December last year. And I've actually got it here, so we can have a look at it. I'm afraid the volume might increase somewhat. There we go. And if you were in Mike Bithel's talk earlier, there's a bit of a bass rumble here as well. So Angelina made this game just with the theme of the game jam as the input. And the connection to the theme isn't great, but it actually is quite an interesting game in many ways, and I'm quite proud of its creation. It's made some intelligent decisions. The music that you're hearing, it's chosen because it wanted an unsettling piece of music. And the reason it wanted that is because it made some connections with the idea of cult leaders for the theme of the game. The reasons why are a bit vaguer. But it's definitely come across with the feeling of being very unsettling. There are very strange bells tolling in the distance. The theme doesn't work perfectly, so the objective of the game is to collect these cruise ships, which is a bit bemusing to most people, but other things work. For instance, you've got to avoid these terrifying monsters. We're going to go and have a look at one of them, clipping through the floor because of all the production value that we have. And these things are pretty terrifying. They definitely work as enemies. And if we touch one, boom, we're dead. So it's not much, but Angelina is still making the same decisions, picking out pieces of music that are appropriate, trying to find sound effects. But the difference is that, unlike the Guardian games, major newspaper articles, here Angelina can make a game about just about anything. So I had a great conversation with a games journalist called Philippa Waugh a few weeks ago, and she asked if Angelina could make a game about avocados. And this threw Angelina for a loop. It just about managed it. But the point was not that it made a bad game, but that it was able to make a game at all. I didn't have to find, a very specific input about avocados in The Guardian. I could just give it that word and click go. And that's a really big step forward. Even though the quality of the games has got worse, Angelina has more freedom, and it's solving harder creative problems. So we're inching our way towards more interesting systems. But a long way off blockbusters and indie awards. What I've shown you so far is mostly about theming, right? But the thing that struck me walking around Rezzed at the very least, or looking at Screenshot Saturday on Twitter, all the developers posting screenshots of their work, is that we play games because we want to encounter new ideas. Even if that new idea isn't mechanical, it might just be an amazing visual style or a really interesting approach to the use of sound and audio. And I think for someone who wants to claim that computers are being creative, like me, you want to be able to show that computers can have new ideas. So about a year and a half ago, Angelina and I released a game called A Puzzling Present. It's free. You can get it on Android, but I don't recommend it because I'm not a very good programmer, so I would get it on the desktop instead. And there are 3 special game mechanics in there that Angelina invented, and 30 levels, which it also designed. And what you're looking at here is probably the thing I'm most proud of that Angelina's ever done, which is a level it designed for a mechanic it designed. So you'll see that Santa is stuck up on this little ledge. This is near the end of the level, and he's got to get to that present. And the only way he can get it is to fling himself off the edge towards the dangerous holly, and then during midair, you have to press a button to invert gravity, like in VV, VV, VV. You've got to flip gravity upside down. And before you hit the holly, and then hold right so that you end up hitting the present. And this level struck me as one that was far more interesting than anything Angelina had designed before. And obviously, I'm hand-picking them, I'm curating them. Like, Angelina doesn't always put out great level designs. But when I looked at this was a moment where I felt, yeah, one day Angelina's going to make a level that could be way, way better than anything any level designer could have come up with themselves. So the way that Angelina did this is now being ported over to Unity. So for the first time, you're going to see inside Angelina at work, inside Unity. I've not shown this to pretty much anyone before. The way that Angelina invented these mechanics was, it was literally just writing code. It was actually going into the code of a game, changing things, and then playing the game to see what that change did. And if it found that the change did something interesting, like flipping gravity in that example that we just saw, it would keep that back, use that as a mechanic, and then try and design levels around it. And at the moment, I'm in the process of porting that over to Unity. So these are some test beds for Angelina. And what you're going to see now is I'm going to press go, and Angelina is going to start trying to solve this level. So this is the player, and this is the exit that it's got to reach. And what you'll notice is that, we're viewing this from the top down, by the way, what you'll notice is that Angelina is being incredibly stupid. So it's moving a certain distance, then it dies, it falls off the edge, it rewinds, and it tries again. And this doesn't look like any artificial intelligence that you've probably ever come across, because it doesn't look intelligent at all. Even the worst game that you've played has bots that are more intelligent than this. Angelina's just banging its head against this problem until it finds a result. But think about the problem that we've got. When you play a game that has intelligent agents in it, they've been told how the rules of the game work. So if you see an enemy, hold your gun up and fire. Or if you see a gap in front of you, run towards it and jump, and that'll get you over it, that'll get you clear. But Angelina's inventing game mechanics that no one's ever seen before. So I can't tell it how to use them, because I don't know what they are. In fact, I hope that no one would be able to tell her how to use it, because they'd have never seen these mechanics before. I want them to be mechanics that no one in this room could ever have dreamed of. So how on earth does Angelina know how to use them? It has to press every button on the keyboard. It has to try every combination, and that's what you're seeing here. Angelina is trying every single combination of buttons to try and get to that exit. And right now it looks really stupid, but Angelina is going to use this as a tool to filter out the good mechanics from the bad ones, the good ideas from the rubbish ones. And in the end, I'm hoping those games that you've just seen won't be boring maze games where you're just picking up cruise ships and avoiding demons. But they'll actually have mechanics that are so good, you're telling your friends about them, you want to play more of them, you want to know where Angelina came up with the idea. Now, this does finish, I promise you, but I'm not going to wait for it to finish. Angelina's almost there. I won't torture you with this. Oh, no. There's a longer one which I can maybe show you at the end. In fact, let's do that now. Let's leave that running. Moving Angelina to Unity has been extremely difficult because just like with those arcade games I showed you at the start, I've had to learn everything from scratch myself, and it's been really tricky. I'm not really a game developer. I'm just a computer science student who wanted to get a PhD in games. So this has taken some time. I'm going to leave Angelina banging her head against that while we go back to the presentation. It does get through eventually. So, what next? Let me just... Yep. Well, so far, I've talked to you about where Angelina came from, the questions that motivated us. Can you make computers act creatively? How do they get new ideas? Can they make games at all? The questions that are coming next, I don't have the answers to. You might have the answers to them, or we might both find out the answers in the future. I'm not sure. Can a computer make a blockbuster? A real blockbuster. A game so good that none of you so much will be interested in it, but the people outside who don't care about Angelina, who don't know anything about Angelina, they will still want to pre-order this game. They won't know who made it, because the game's so good. They will place their $40 pre-order online, and they will pick up that game on day one and tweet about it and make YouTube videos about it without ever knowing Angelina existed. I showed you this picture at the start. I mocked it up. It's an amazing Photoshop by me. I even included the Peggy logo at the bottom. But maybe this won't be a joke one day. Maybe one day Sony or Microsoft will see the value in an idea that Angelina's had. Not Angelina itself, but an idea that has come out of the software. And they'll want to sell it as a major title. And maybe it won't be Angelina. I imagine it will be some other more sophisticated system. But that question's still there. This question's a little bit more meaningful to me. Can a computer earn respect? So as you've been out today, you probably talked to people from various indie studios, AAA studios. There might be some in the audience here. When they talk about their games to each other, they share ideas, they give criticism and feedback, they give each other support on Twitter. What would it take for Angelina to earn recognition at some point in the future for an idea that it had come up with? What would it take for one of those indie developers you met today to come to Angelina and ask it for advice on a design problem it was having? One of the things that I'm really interested in at the moment is not making Angelina a better game designer, but making it a better peer in the game design community. And one of the reasons why I wanted it to enter Ludum Dare was not so I could show off that it was good, because it certainly wasn't good. 500th out of 1,000, my goodness. And that's a long tail. They were kind of pretty much the same towards that end. I wanted to show that Angelina could do the things that human game designers do. It could participate in a community. It could contribute in the same way that I do when I sit down and make my terrible Ludum Dare game. And in the future, maybe we'll get to that point where one day someone will stand up at the IGF Awards and they'll say, I'm accepting this award on behalf of a piece of software. And finally, can a computer stand alone? One of the things that really fascinated me about my supervisor when I first met him was the way he would talk about his software. He would say that when he died, he wanted his software to go on painting and learning and producing new things and developing as if he'd never existed. At some point in the future, I'm not going to be here, none of you are going to be here, but games will still be here. And will our grandchildren be playing games made by Angelina that look nothing like the ones we've seen today? Will Angelina still be developing and learning new ideas? I really hope that it will. And what I want to know is, what will it take for a piece of software like Angelina to be on its own out in the wilderness? No longer programmed by me, no longer run by me. I don't have to press the button. If I just go back to Unity, there is actually a button here. I don't know whether you can see it. It says, design me a game. That's literally the button I press when Angelina enters game jams. At what point will Angelina step away from all of that and press that button itself and decide when it wants to make a game and what about? And when we get there, I'll let you know. Thank you very much for listening. I wanted to keep it short because there are other demos that I can show you, and hopefully there are some questions too. But if you don't have time to ask me a question, or maybe you're a bit shy, or maybe you're listening via Twitch and I can't hear your question, please email me. I like to be in touch with people. Follow us on Twitter. Follow Angelina on Twitter. Sometimes she asks for help with her games. And as I said at the start, thank you all so much for coming here today, because your support and interest is what makes this such an interesting project. It's not just a science project. It interacts with the whole games community, and I really want to thank you all for that. Thanks.
We do have time for some questions. If you do have any questions, come and form an orderly queue behind me. And we have our first one here.
Hello, I want to know how long does it take to make a game?
For Angelina to make a game?
Yeah.
So at the moment, it widely varies, like between the different versions of Angelina, but right now it takes about 3 or 4 hours. Then it takes me a painstaking 3 hours to export it, because my export system is awful, but the actual development process is about 3 hours. But that is probably going to increase by a factor of maybe 10 this year, because Angelina is going to start playing these games out in a much more detailed way than it is before. It's going to really have to start completing its own games before it releases them.
So have you considered using players to use their feedback in an evolutionary algorithm or something like that?
Yes, I absolutely have. And I want to do that soon, actually. So follow me on Twitter, or maybe follow Angelina on Twitter if you want to be a part of that. What I'd love to have is the ability for Angelina to email builds to people, receive emails back at her own email address with very simple surveys. Like, it can't read natural text, but maybe very simple checkbox surveys. And yeah, it could actually have its own set of playtesters without me being involved. That would be really exciting. Yeah. Before I get this question, actually, could you, sir, who's about to ask me a question, could you give me a noun of some kind? Like an occupation or an animal, maybe? I didn't mean to. You came up to ask a question, and then I asked you a question. This is not really fair. I'm going to leave this working while you ask your question. Hit me.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, sorry. I was just wondering, like, throughout all the games that Angelina's made, each time it makes a game, does it learn from its past mistakes and then use those as like improvements in the future, or is it not at that stage yet?
It's not, and that's something that I get asked a lot. It's something that is conspicuously absent. There we go. We've popped in. Conspicuously absent in a lot of creative software, actually. The Painting Full, the art software I showed you at the beginning, that can actually learn. When it does portraits, it tries to achieve something, and if it doesn't do it, it critiques itself and tries to get better later. And I would love Angelina to be able to do something similar to that. But it's really tricky because game design is very tricky, and I'm trying to become a better game designer so I can understand this process. But yeah, it's going to be tricky. That's going to be a really hard one to get over, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks. So cats hate water, so water has appeared as the enemy. Continue.
Really obvious question. Why did you call it Angelina?
Right, so it's a really terrible answer. It's not obvious at all, unfortunately. I used to really like stupid names for projects. If anyone knew me at my university days, they'll attest this. So for instance, we had a project that I called Reactor, which was the really effective automated compiler tester, or Reactor. So it goes back on itself, right? So Angelina is a novel, game-evolving lab rat I've named Angelina. And I don't tell anyone because it's a terrible acronym, but sometimes I get put on the spot and I have to admit it. I couldn't get anything better for the L. If the L wasn't so bad, I wouldn't mind telling people, but there you go.
Really quick question, but that maze game with the ships, what was the theme that you put in?
Right, so this is good. I wanted to talk about this, but I wasn't sure if I would have time. So, the original theme was, you only get one. And the reason that game jams are so interesting is because humans are really good at coming up with expansions of ideas and things like that. So there were great Ludum Dare games, but Angelina's not that clever. So what it does is it picks a word out of that sentence. So it picked out the word one. And the problem is that one is a very general word. It wasn't a really good word for Angelina to choose. So it ends up finding the word founder as a related word to the word one. So there's a panic button that Angelina has that says, this word does not give me enough data, I need something different. So it looks at one and it comes to founder. And I think the connection there is that people who found things, they're often the first to do it, or they're along their own. And so that game was about founders. So you get cults from that, the founders of religious groups or cults. You also get ships, because ships can founder on rocks. That's why there are cruise ships in the game. And that's also why there's a ship's bell ringing. And you see, it kind of coincidentally works, because the bell sounds quite sinister. But it's actually just because Angelina thinks this is a game about ships, so let's have a ship's bell ringing at the start. And what's interesting is that those coincidences seem great, but what we'd rather is that Angelina intended them. So in the future versions, you're going to see Angelina telling you more about its games in a kind of developer commentary style. But thanks for asking that question. I just want to show the abilities of the cat. It can meow, it can purr, sleep so much. This is a bit of an artifact of, like catnip. I don't know if that's an ability. That's a pretty... Items, it's got fleas, it's got a tail, and it's got a wet nose. That's not bad. Thanks for the suggestion, whoever that was. Next question.
If you repeatedly put different themes into Angelina, does it continuously come out new outcomes, or is it just the same one repeated?
So this is an interesting philosophical point, because I often complain that no one would ask Terry Kavanagh to make two games about the same thing, one after the other, because it's a kind of odd thing to ask someone. So you say, oh, well, if you asked Angelina to make the same game, would it come up with the same thing? It wouldn't come up with exactly the same game. For the Guardian articles, it almost would. It would come up with very similar ones, but now it's got much more diversity. But it would still have the same flavor. So if you ask it to make a game about cats, you would see some similar 3D models, some similar sound effects. There'd be variation, but not a huge amount. In the far future, not the far future, but at some point in the future, I showed you different versions of Angelina. Some of them made platform games, some of them made 3D maze games, some of them made, puzzle platformers. What I'd like is Angelina to make a decision when it gets given the theme. Today I'm going to make a game in this genre, and that might improve the diversity a bit. So if you asked it for two cat games, the first one is a puzzle platformer, the next one's a roguelike, such as this one. So yeah, at the moment, not entirely the same, but certainly a bit too similar for everyone's liking. But I think it's one of those unfair things that people only ask software to do. They never ask Picasso to paint two pictures of the same vase. Well, they don't ask him anything because he's dead, but you get my point.
Hi, I'm interested in how the Angelina actually decides what pictures to use and why it should pick one item over another, or stuff like that.
So sometimes it has very sophisticated reasons, and sometimes it has very dumb reasons. So for instance, let me use the piece of music as an example from that game. So first of all, Angelina decides that it wants to make a game about founders and cults. And it finds, through another tool made by another researcher called Tony Veal, it finds that people feel unsettled by founders of cults, which makes sense, because cults are kind of unsettling, right? Then it uses the word unsettling, and it matches that with an emotion library, and it finds the nearest emotion that it can use to search this music database. So from unsettling, you get scary, I think. I can't remember or eerie. And then from eerie, it finds a piece of music. So that's quite an intelligent chain. That's not a bad one. For the ships, it got the word ship, and then it just searched a database and chose one randomly, right? So that's not quite so intelligent. And obviously, the aim is to slowly make these processes more intelligent. So some of them are looking pretty good, some of them not so much. So it varies. At worst, it's random. At best, it's sophisticated. One thing that I've done in the last couple of months is I've built a very small system that can generate bits of code to decide between two examples of anything. So you can give it two pieces of music, and it can tell you which one it prefers. And then normally really rubbish opinions, like, I like this sword because it does more damage than this sword. But they are real opinions, and I'm hoping that I can use that so that there's no more randomness anymore in Angelina. Every decision, even if it's a really lame one, it's justified in some way.
That is all the time we have for questions right now. I'd just like to say a big thank you to Mike, and thank you all for coming along. I'm sure you agree that was absolutely fascinating, so please, a round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Something and slide it.